This Kennedy patriarch is known as the famous father of JFK and RFK. He built a fortune in banking, stock trading, and as a Hollywood studio head. As FDR's ambassador to Britain, his doubts about the war brought him into conflict with leaders of that country and with the administration. Here we discuss the non-interventionist battle of Joseph P. Kennedy. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. When he assumed the ambassadorship in 1937, he quickly found favor with the British press. He was already famous, and it didn't hurt having 9 photogenic children. As Kennedy began to speak out about the possibility of war, he fell out of favor with the British just as quickly. In his plain-spoken Boston manner, he told the press that the average American is, quote, more interested in how he's going to eat and whether his insurance is good than in foreign politics. Along that same line, he mentioned to Lord Halifax, quote, the isolationist tendencies at home. Kennedy was right. Prior to Pearl Harbor, polls showed that up to 80% of the American public opposed their country's entry into a new war in Europe. Echoing George Washington's farewell address, in March 1938, Kennedy told the Duke of Kent and other members of British high society that Americans were, quote, appalled by the prospect of war, and that the great majority were against entering any entangling alliances. He wanted the British to know that America's entry into a war was not a foregone conclusion. With Germany's annexation of Austria, war tensions escalated. Kennedy continued to ignite controversy with his friendship with Lady Astor, who had complained to a New York Times reporter of, quote, the anti-German propaganda in the United States. She added that the, quote, agitators against Germany were forgetting completely the atrocities going on in other nations, in Russia, in Spain, and Ethiopia. She invited Kennedy to a lunch at Cliveden, the Astor's country estate. In attendance was Charles Lindbergh, the heroic aviator who bitterly opposed America's entry into any new war. Kennedy later asked Lindbergh to write a report outlining what would happen in Britain if war began. In it, Lindbergh stressed the devastating power of Germany's air force, arguing that France and Britain are, quote, too weak to defend themselves. Lindbergh had previously inspected the air power of France, Britain, and Germany, and was speaking from first-hand knowledge. He advised the British to, quote, avoid war now at almost any cost. Kennedy dared to suggest in an October 1938 speech on Trafalgar Day that, quote, democratic and dictator countries, unquote, should try to work through their differences since, quote, we have to live together in the same world whether we like it or not. This infuriated his bosses back in Washington, prompting Secretary of State Cordell Hull to urge that Kennedy, in his speech, did not speak for the administration. FDR himself gave a broadcast speech that repudiated what Ambassador Kennedy had said only days earlier. Kennedy's plain-spoken anti-interventionism continued to outrage his British hosts and the Roosevelt administration, who plotted to minimize his role. Even after Britain declared war on Germany on September 1, 1939, Kennedy, in a private telegram to the president, asked Roosevelt to step in and stop it. He urged the president to try and deal directly with Hitler, and that, quote, having been a practical person all my life, I am of the opinion it is quite conceivable that President Roosevelt can maneuver himself into a position where he can save the world. It's no surprise that Roosevelt rejected the idea out of hand, calling Kennedy's plea, quote, the silliest message to me I have ever received. Equally unsurprising was Kennedy's resignation as ambassador, which came less than 2 months after the beginning of the war. He agreed to stay in the role until FDR found a replacement, but he sailed back to the United States. Despite his resignation, Kennedy pledged to help the president keep the U.S. out of the war. The America First Committee wanted him as chairman. Former President Herbert Hoover asked him to sign an anti-intervention statement with other notables. He declined both, saying he preferred to wage his own independent battle to keep the country from war. But what was his reasoning for opposing America's entry? There's no doubt that he feared for the lives of his 2 sons in the military. He's quoted as saying, I hate to think how much money I would give up rather than sacrifice Joe and Jack in a war. Critics said it was because he had made his fortune and didn't want to see it threatened. But a study of his quotations reveals other concerns. For America to go to war to defend Britain's colonial possessions didn't sit well with him. Kennedy thought the war might end the free market capitalist system in which he'd made his fortune, and that a totalitarian fascist-style government might have to be implemented in order for America to wage and win the war. In other words, the price might be too high, and the American way of life might have to be sacrificed. It's easy with the benefit of hindsight to dismiss Kennedy's concerns, but before June 1941, it was not obvious that the Soviet Union would enter the war on the side of the Allies. In fact, the USSR and Germany had a non-aggression pact and divided Poland between them. If the USSR had not fought and defeated the invading Germans on its territory, weakening Germany as a whole, then it's conceivable that a full-strength German onslaught might have defeated Britain and France. Under that scenario, Lindbergh's assessment of the situation might have proven accurate. In one of his last anti-interventionist speeches before retiring to private life, Kennedy said, "If I am called appeaser because I oppose the entry of this country into the present war, I cheerfully plead guilty. So must every one of you who want to keep America out of war."